So first, what are all these forms? There are so many forms. You all have, oh, my slides are changing on me. You all have 4 required forms for every project. You're gonna have form 1, which is the adult sponsor checklist. Why are my slides changing?
You have it on automatic slideshow, I think.
I must.
Yeah.
Let's see if I can fix that while I talk. So you'll have a form 1, which is the adult sponsor checklist. We use that form to decide which other forms you're going to need. So if you say things like, this is going to involve human participants, then you're going to generate the human participants forms. So form 1 will do a lot of the logic behind the other forms you need. Form 1A is going to be where the student is going to tell us a little bit about their project and attach their research plan. So everyone needs a form 1A. Form 1B is going to be where the student and the parent sign the release form that says, yes, we've read the rules, and yes, I give consent for the student to participate. And form 3 is going to be the risk assessment form, which we use to make sure that the students are thinking about risks and what risks are involved in the project. So all the other forms listed there are going to be required based on the content of the individual project. So if you're working in a lab at Pitt or CMU or some other industrial site, you're going to need a form 1C and a form 2. When you fill out form 1, you'll answer questions which will generate those, at least a form 2. When the SRC reviews the project, they will determine if you need a form 1C or not. If you check the box that says you're working with human participants, you'll generate a form 4 and a sample informed consent form. If you check the box that says you're working with vertebrate animals, you'll get either a form 5A or 5B, depending on if you're working in a regulated research institution or you're working at home. If you say you're working with bacteria or other potentially hazardous biological agents, you'll generate 6A or 6B or maybe both, depending on what it is you say you're working with. And if you're doing a continuation project, you'll get a form 7. I anticipate a lot of these this year if students who didn't get to display their work from last year decide to continue working on the same topic and maybe expand their question or use a different experimental technique or analyze their data in a different way, they can do a continuation project. But the review committee needs to be able to compare last year's project to this year's project, make sure that they're different enough to qualify as a continuation. So if you say that you are continuing a project from last year, that will generate a form 7, where the student can tell us what is different between last year's project and this year's project. So all of these forms are on the STEMosphere site, stemisphere.org/precef. This is where you will register your school, register yourself as a teacher, create all your projects, register your students, complete all the forms, and have them all reviewed by the scientific review committee. We have done a ton of work on the system over the summer. I think you are all going to really like the improvements that we've made in the usability of the system. I think it makes a lot more sense now, and there are a ton more instructions. So any help you need is probably embedded in the system now, but of course I will still be here to help you through any questions you have. So your forms will appear. You can click on each form to open it, complete all those required fields, and submit your forms. There are instructions for every single question on every single form at this point. None of those existed last year. So if you have a question about a specific question on a form, click on those instructions. There are also user manuals for every user type. So if you've designated someone a qualified scientist or a designated supervisor or a veterinarian for a project, they will be able to access a user manual which will tell them exactly what they need to do through their whole process of completing the paperwork. There's also a frequently asked questions document, which I wrote based on problems we had last year and all the questions that I got over and over again. So those documents are all available in the system for anyone who needs help. If your forms are still yellow, which is the pending completion status, that's because they're missing signatures. And we've made it a lot easier for you to see which signatures they're missing this year. So that should help the process as well. I'll let Janet talk about the SRC review process.
Okay. The purpose of the Scientific Review Committee. The SRC reviews all projects, research plans, and accompanying forms to ensure that, first of all, that the rights and welfare of the student researcher and human subjects are protected. It also wants to protect the health and well-being of any vertebrate animal subjects, follow federal regulations governing research, use safe laboratory practices, address environmental concerns, and maintain consistency with the ICEF requirements. Now, we have a couple of requirements that are over and above what ICEF requires, but they're fairly innocuous. The big one that we've had over the years has to do with ingestion of substances by subjects, by human subjects. We expanded that to include use of things that were spread on the skin and I guess smelling, a couple of other things. We've relaxed those a little bit because we were catching things and rejecting things that were perfectly okay, like washing your hands with soap and water kind of thing, which, you know, is typically not a safety concern. But our main goal is to make sure that everybody is safe. We've had projects where, one project which we shake our heads over every time we see it, had a kid shooting rifles into cement blocks. Needless to say, that was a real safety concern, and we rejected that project. We can't really help if the student's going to go out and do that under supervision of their parent or teacher or whatever, but we can't allow those kinds of things to be part of the science fair. So we do tend to, if we have questions about the safety of something, we will go back to the parent, the student, the teacher, and have them explain more exactly what they're doing to make sure a project is safe. But safety is really the big issue when we are looking, when the SRC is reviewing things, and following the rules. That's the second thing. You know, make sure that you're following the rules and that you've got a safe project. Next, Nick. So why didn't my project get approved? These are the main things that require, that when the SRC looks at a project, the main reasons why projects get rejected. The first one is an incomplete research plan. If your student submits a plan that has no procedure, we will reject that project because we don't know what the student is doing. Until we know exactly what the student is doing, we cannot approve a project. Bibliography formatting problems. I should put this emblazoned on my forehead. URLs alone are not sufficient references. You cannot have a student just put the URL for where they find a paper on the web and have that be a legitimate bibliography citation. They should be using formats that are acceptable in the scientific community. And that always requires the title of a paper, the author of the paper, the date that the paper was written, and at a minimum, and if they got it off of a website when they acquired it. Now, the approval dates and project start dates used to be a big problem, but now with the system, we kind of prevent those conflicts. So your project cannot start before the approval, okay? And that means approval by everybody, not just approval by the teacher. It also means approval by your parent, any other qualified scientist that needs to approve the project. Those dates need to be before the actual project start date. Lack of detail or conflicting information on forms. If the student says the project is one thing and the teacher says the project is different, then we will question that. So for instance, the student says that they are using human subjects and the teacher hasn't checked the box on form 1. It says it's human subjects. That means that they're not getting the correct forms assigned, and we'll need to send that back so that we get that conflict resolved. Sometimes it's student just not understanding what a human subject is. Okay, studies requiring additional review and pre-approval are missing their forms. Again, this will happen if the teacher or the adult sponsor, which is who is filling out form 1, doesn't check the correct boxes. So you need to make sure you understand what your student is doing so that you check the correct boxes on form 1. Okay. Next, Nikki. So what if you need more help? Check the form instructions, the user manual, the FAQ document on STEMosphere. Read the guide to the scientific review at that location. And you can also email Nikki, and she will pass questions on to the scientific review committee. You're also able to go and look at the large set of rules for ISEF, since we follow all of those rules. One of the big rules that I get a lot of from middle school students is they want to try and do bacteria studies at home. That is specifically ruled out by the ISEF rules. You're not permitted to do bacteria studies at home. You can gather bacteria at home, but you must incubate in a lab situation, which means they have to take them either to school or to some other lab where they can be incubated properly. That's one of the big rules that gets violated all the time, that we see that we cannot allow. And again, it's a safety measure. You don't know what kind of bacteria you are picking up when you swab your doorknob. I think that's it, Nikki.
Very true. Thank you, Janet. Those bacteria rules are in the pre-CEF rulebook and the ISEF rulebook, and those are both available at pittsburghsciencefair.org.
One of the things I wanted to mention, Nikki, because it came up when you were showing that, please be careful to read the definitions of who people are. Mm-hmm. The qualified scientist has a very specific definition, and the sponsoring adult is not generally a qualified scientist based on the definition of what a qualified scientist is. So the teacher generally does not have to fill out a qualified scientist form, which is form what, 2? Form 2? So you do not have to fill that out as a teacher. We assume that teachers have the ability to lead their students through this process.
Most projects do not require a qualified scientist. So it's okay to leave qualified scientist blank and just go ahead and complete that form 1, 1A, 1B, and 3. Most projects should be okay with those 4 forms.
Thank you.
Thank you, Janet.